Hello and welcome to a power outage edition of the Intentional Brief, your weekly video update on the one big thing in cybersecurity for growth stage companies, their management teams, and investors. I'm your host, Shay Colson, managing partner at Intentional Cybersecurity, and you can find us online at intentionalcyber.com. Today is Monday, November 4th, 2024, and it is finally almost election day here in the United States. So we're going to do a bit of a geopolitical focus here today, as we've seen lots of news come out of the governmental levels in the last week, probably unrelated to the election, but still important for this audience regardless. The Telegraph out of the UK has an article entitled "Why Chinese Spies Are Sending a Chill Through Silicon Valley," which features a great quote from Ken McCallum, the Director General of Britain's MI5, which says, "If you are operating at the cutting edge of tech in this decade, you may not be interested in geopolitics, but geopolitics is interested in you." This article comes hot on the heels of a new secure innovation partnership released by the Five Eyes Coalition, that joint intelligence partnership made up of the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. This document, which we've linked to down below, does a really nice job of laying out the risks for non-technical folks. There's one for CEOs and there's one track for investors. And it gives them some frameworks on how to think about these things. And they lay out 5 principles to secure these innovations that these growth stage companies are producing. First is know the threats. 2 is secure your environment. 3 is secure your products. 4 is secure your partnerships. And then 5 is secure your growth. Now, again, these are not specific controls, but they are written for folks who are maybe meaningfully approaching security for the first time. And in those instances, these principles are actually, I think, quite helpful. If you're looking for more than this, there were some other pieces that came out this week from 2 of the Five Eyes partners, US and Canada, in their own strategic cyber risk assessments that I think are worth noting here. First, from Canada, Canada calls out 2 main risk factors for their global perspective from a Canadian risk exposure. The first being cyber threats from state adversaries, probably no surprise there. But the second being the rise of cybercrime as a service, in particular ransomware. And then that's it. For 2025 and 2026, they only called out these 2 things. Perhaps most interesting about these pieces for the global perspective from Canada's risk assessment is, first, that there's only 2 items. I think that's worth noting, that they're simplifying what they're looking at and really boiling it down. But second, that they call out in the state adversaries piece all of the usual suspects: Russia, China, actually China first, then Russia, then Iran. But Canada also formally calls out India as a threat, likely having to do with some of their intelligence operations on Canadian soil, including the assassination of a Canadian national who has advocated for the cessation of a piece of India. But to assassinate someone within Canada's grounds has certainly riled some feathers in the government there, and led to this interesting quote from the assessment that says, quote, "We assess that Indian state-sponsored cyber threat actors likely conduct cyber threat activity against the Government of Canada networks for the purposes of espionage, and we judge that official bilateral relations between Canada and India will very likely drive Indian state-sponsored cyber threat activity against Canada." So essentially what they're saying is, now that Canada is standing up for themselves, India is going to retaliate in the cyber front. They also note on the other threat vectors, their assessment that, quote, "In the next 2 years, ransomware actors will almost certainly escalate their extortion tactics and refine their capabilities to increase pressure on victims to pay ransom and evade law enforcement detection." I think those 2 things are the big takeaways here. And a 2-year timeline is actually quite a bit, because we've seen ransomware continue to push to the highest levels in terms of both impact and frequency. And if these strategic analyses indicate that we're going to see 2 more years of escalation, that is something to prepare for. Meanwhile, in the US, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has published their 2025-2026 International Strategic Plan, and they also have a slimmed-down version with only 3 goals. The first is bolster the resilience of foreign infrastructure on which the US depends. The second is strengthen integrated cyber defense. And the third is unify agency coordination of international activities. So again, trying to stay very focused on what this looks like. But between these goals and the Five Eyes announcements, I think it's clear that we're seeing something that we've been saying on this channel for quite some time now, which is that cybersecurity is a team sport, and it will be that way for the foreseeable future. So that said, I think the team of adversaries, those who are on the other side here, whether they be criminals or nation states or inadvertent clicks or emails from our own users, these threat actors and risks are also building momentum. So while we might be heartened to see progress at the governmental levels, don't think that means the threat actors are staying still. Far from it. I think the takeaway for us here at the mid-market level is that let's be honest, you and I aren't going to end the scourge of ransomware, and we're not going to influence an adversarial foreign intelligence service, but there's still plenty that we can control that will impact how we interact with these threats, regardless of their source. So to that end, it's my hope that each of us seeks continued collaboration, continued partnership, both internally and externally with others, so that we can move from this goal of maybe just shared survival, but rather towards something that looks a lot more like supporting mutual growth and benefit by being more resilient in this cyberspace. From a fundraising perspective, if you thought last week was a big number, get ready for this week, because we saw more than $48 billion in newly committed capital in the last 7 days, including TPG raising nearly $5 billion for their second climate-focused fund, Quantum Capital Group putting up $5.25 for their 8th flagship energy PE fund, plus $2.8 for a structured capital fund, and another $2 billion for other associated funds. Berkshire Partners putting up $7.8 billion for their 11th private equity flagship fund, and then Blackstone raising $22 billion for a new direct lending fund. So I would read all of this new capital as a pretty clear signal that that these investors think there's going to be opportunity post-election, and both the investors and these firms are trying to position themselves to take advantage of that. And I guess the question then would be, what opportunities are you seeing, and how are you positioning yourselves to take advantage of that? With that, a reminder that you can find all the links to the articles and reports we talked about in the comments section below. You can find written transcripts and back issues of these videos at intentionalcyber.com, and we will see you next week for another edition of the Intentional Brief.